Hey again, welcome back to another edition of History Inspired Fantasy. I am Joseph S. Samaniego, the author of the Carolingian Age fantasy series, and I am also a historian by training. That's what my master's degree is actually in, is history. And what I am trying to do, and what I would really love to bring to the world out there, is the idea of the fantasy genre that we know with many things like Tolkien, Elder Scrolls, Forgotten Realms, a lot of things. We have a basis of it in history because that is our sort of inspiration. That is our fallback in a sense. So I'm here today to talk more about that. So, what is one of the major visuals that you see in fantasy works, especially when it comes to art, when it comes to films, video games, and even in the descriptions of what you have in the literature? And that is castles. And that's what we've been talking about the last couple of videos is castles. Well, this one, I'm going to talk about probably the most famous style of castle to originate from the early medieval time period in the 11th century and in the 12th, which was the Norman style keep. And this is your traditional looking castle. Now, what we see here is Richmond Castle, and this is your Norman style keep. And it is a very simple shape. It's a very heavy shape. So there was a lot that had changed with the structures on how they were built. And this one actually is on a moat and bailey, but as you can see, it is tall. It is a lot taller. It encompasses multiple floors, and we're going to get into that in a minute. But then we're also looking at how it's designed. It has the towers, which are shorter here. You see some that have bigger towers, but it is also easily defended. And being stone, it is extremely tough and durable. This one has lasted for quite a few centuries. So obviously, what we're looking at is a well thought out piece of architecture. And here we actually see the layout for Richmond Castle. You have the keep here, and then you have what is basically the entire footprint. So this is the wall, and you would have stuff, other things here. This is apartments. You got a chapel, and this is just the main ward. What would be essentially a courtyard or a part of that motte from previous castles. But you can see it's very defensible. It is extremely large footprint. And this is what we would have seen in the later Norman period of England and in France. And a lot of other castles that have come out in literature and in fantasy genre have really modeled themselves on the style of castle because it is so well known. It is such a easy thing to point out and to see and to create. I think kids even nowadays still make these designs for their classes. So it is still a very easy thing to use. So we're looking at the floor plan of a very early medieval or a Norman castle, Norman keep. And as you see, you got the four towers. Now, this would have just been the keep itself, not the whole footprint, not everything. And again, you're going to walk in and you're going to be met typically with a great hall, which would have been on the main floor in some cases. Sometimes it wouldn't have been on the ground floor, but again, you're not on the ground here. A lot of times there also would have been a cellar. I didn't include that just because of space, but there could have been or there would have been a cellar. Either you would have walked through the cellar and then gone up the stairs to the main floor where the great hall would have been, or you would have walked into the great hall. For this purposes, we're just going to have a walk into the great hall. A lot of others, as I said, you would have walked kind of down into a cellar and essentially what it would have been a mud room to some extent, and then walked up a flight of stairs to the main great hall. And you have the kitchen, a larder, and then the servants' quarters. The servants' quarters would have been off the side to the kitchen. They would have had their own quarters, and there could have been more. And they could have even slept in the cellar or others, depending on how many servants you had. but they would have been close to the work. So from here, you would have gone up one of the stairs, and I put stairs in all of these, but that doesn't necessarily mean they would have all had stairs. I just did that for aesthetic purposes. You would have gone up possibly to the court. Now, again, this could have been done in the Great Hall. This could have been, I hear I had them separated. Court where he would have had his advisors, had meetings, called his banners, his vassals to come. But this is where the Lord would have presided. Now, again, he could have presided in the Great Hall. We've seen that in things like Game of Thrones, where Rob's in the Great Hall, and that's where he presides. John accepts his king in the north in the Great Hall. That was very common as well too. I separated them here because in some castles we have seen separation. Then you go to the third floor, and that would have been where either his children or his lady would have slept a lot of times. And then if she had a lady in waiting, would have probably slept right out here so she could be close by. And a lot of times they wouldn't have slept in the same chambers. That was just the way things were in that time period. You got to remember that in most places, you didn't really marry for love. You married for a business transaction, a social transaction, or just to get something. The concept of marrying for love is relatively new throughout, although it was very common in those days as well to marry for love at a certain societal level. So, a prince probably wouldn't have married for love. A baron probably wouldn't have married for love. He would have married for some kind of gain, which would have been land, money, commitments, titles, things like that. That wasn't always the case, but at the same time, there was also societal norms that would have said men and women shouldn't sleep in the same bed together. So they would have had separate beds in a lot of ways. And then the Lord's bed would have been here. Now, again, these would have been different staircases. So the main floor probably would have got here and then to here, and this would have been off on a different staircase. The third floor, the ladies' chambers would have been through a different route. And that was just basically just because that's how, as a gentleman, you would have approached it. You wouldn't have walked into a lady's bedchamber. So here, the Lord's bed chamber, again, his trusted steward. We see this in the show Versailles, when the King Louis the 14th's steward basically is there with him in the bedroom, sleeping on a smaller bed, kind of at his beck and call. And for better or for worse, we see that to the detriment of his own family, though they are completely understanding, and his loyalty is unrivaled. And a lot of that was because he saw the king at his worst. He saw the king at his most embarrassing, and it was just his duty. So the Lord's desk here to administer books, different functions that he would need as a lord to present himself. Now, again, this is a generic view. A lot of castles were different in their floor plans. A lot of castles were similar in their floor plans, and a lot of castles we are speculating because of how ruined they are, and we're comparing them to what better results we have. Again, the one thing that was left out of here was the cellar, kind of extra storage area, and really the where they would have walked in at, and that was left off mostly because just space. I'm still working on the spacing for layouts. I have a few others that are going to be a whole lot more detailed, especially when it comes to the town elements. This one is spaced layout. But let us see real quick in some other examples that we have for how castles were kind of laid out. The first example I want to give is from Game of Thrones. This is the Tower of Joy, and this is a style of Norman castle that would have been seen in the Mediterranean. It would have been a 10th century, early 11th century style castle. And in a sense, it is really just a keep and a tower. Now, the interesting thing about this being Norman is that a lot of Norman sailors, a lot of the Normans came from the Norse, came from Vikings, and a lot of them had gone to the Mediterranean. And what we find is they adapted their culture in the Mediterranean. Even after they settled in Normandy, they still went to Sicily, went to North Africa. They were very prevalent. In fact, the Kingdom of Two Sicilies, or just the Kingdom of Sicily, or Count of Sicily at one point, was Norman. They were a Norman family. Many of their citizens were Norman. So what you see is that same style of architecture just adapted to their environment, which is great for Dorne in Game of Thrones because that's what it looks like, and that's what you have here. You have the very structured, simplistic shape, but just extremely easily to defend style keep. Again, a very rudimentary, simplistic shaped tower that is very, very, very strong. So that is one quick example. And obviously you get the little fight going on down there. That's always been one of my favorite scenes. I don't know. I just always like that scene watching Sir Arthur Dane, the Sword of the Morning, to go to work. That was pretty cool. And again, from Game of Thrones, we're going to take Pike. Now here we see various styles of castles, but one of the clear examples that we're seeing are Norman style elements here, especially with these three. You have the towers, you have the rigid structure of that square, but then you also have the very design of Norman look. And a lot of what the Ironlanders kind of traits with their history is very Norman too. Come from raiders, and they're experts on the ocean. We see that a lot with Normans as well. But this is very, very wonderfully done. I've always liked these castles. Extremely well done and very Norman style. For the last example from film that we're going to show is the Tower of London. And this is a great wide shot of the Tower of London and the areas around it in a very Norman style from 2010's Robin Hood. For what it was a pretty cool movie, but it wasn't the greatest movie, but it was pretty cool. But this shot here is really, really cool because you get to see the different obviously the Tower of London building itself, which was a Norman style castle, probably the quintessential looking Norman castle, with also the walls, the other watchtowers. You can actually learn from, if you've never been to the Tower of London, if you've never seen, like on Google Maps, the proximity it is to the river, you get to see that there is actually a small little dock. It does offer a place for the ships to come for the kings, and that was a pivotal scene in the film. But this is just a beautifully done castle, and it's seen again a couple times in the film, and as well as a few other really cool looking castles. I'd recommend checking the film out just for let go of any Robin Hood style fantasies that you have. At least these guys have an English accent, but it is a pretty cool film just to see what they do. And Robin Hood is a fantasy, so it works. So now we're looking at it and saying, okay, well, Joseph, what did you make? What other castles have you made that's Norman style? And I'm going to go into that. I actually have a few that I have incorporated. I didn't make the castles. They come with some of the mapping software I have, but I actually incorporated these into my towns of my books. So first one is Lostwood. Now, Lostwood is very important. The barony of Lostwood, this is the actual town of Lostwood. It's within the kind of a dense forest area, and it plays significant roles in various stories. The people more so than the area. The forest itself played a role in the Far Off Kingdom novel that I wrote. The people are very important. Several barons are extremely important stories. Got one, actually, the Baron of Lostwood is a key, and his son, his illegitimate son that becomes legitimized, is very important in the Far Off Kingdom. And that son actually is going to be very important in the new book I'm working on, Scorned. He is going to play a pivotal role. But this is the actual town of Lostwood. It's not a huge town. It is within the forest. and it's got a nice little waterway running through it. But the keep itself is very Norman style keep. Now it's not on a bailey as you would have seen in others, and there's no wall. And the reason there's no wall is because they have a very defensible, not as good of a wall, but a very defensible forest. Again, a wall would have been better, and that comes into play later on. So there's a method to my madness on that. But this is the nice little town of Lostwood with a Norman style keep. Now, have no fear. I do have a Bailey style, somewhat Bailey style keep, Norman keep, very similar keep for a town. This is town of Ash, a smaller town. It has a wall around it, but it also has a Norman style keep. I am updating a lot of my maps to color as we speak. So this one is one of the older ones. But again, it's a very, very simplistic style. Not one of the greatest style design, but it just goes to show the diversity in the way the towns are laid out. But again, Norman style keep. And like I said, you would have gone here. More than likely on this keep, you would have noticed that this would have been where they walked in, stables, and then here would have been the Great Hall. So just a nice little something that I've worked on. So I hope you enjoyed that. Thank you for watching. Please remember to like and subscribe for more. There will be more. I am actually working on one that is going to compare some of these castles that we've discussed that are in the fantasy world. And then what it's actually also going to do is look at those castles and that architecture, not just the castles, but the architecture of the other areas as well through the fantasy world, and just kind of see what the history of going back to them was. So you got an idea of different styles of castles and fortifications that were around in history that we've seen in fantasy. And then next time we're going to talk about, and we're going to really just kind of dive into where we see them specifically. Not really so much my examples anymore, although I will show one example of a town that I've been working on, but also to see where have you seen these? And you may not even recognize, or maybe now you're saying, hey, I have seen that in this game or in that movie, or they describe that in this book. So come back next time, click subscribe, and be sure to like the video, click your notification so you can get that notification of when that video comes out, and be on the lookout. I'm going to be doing a couple movie reviews coming up here soon. So please like and subscribe again, and I hope to see you next time.